It started when she was a child, the youngest in a family where teasing was constant and affection was conditional. Janet Jackson later recalled how Michael would poke fun at her, how small comments followed her into adulthood, shaping insecurities she carried for years. She said she wasn't sure if everyone was trying to shield their own pain or simply survive it, because around her, she watched the family quietly fracture. History would come to worship Michael Jackson as the greatest entertainer who ever lived, but the rumors that followed him were never holy. For years, whispers suggested his deepest fear didn't come from fame, lawsuits, or tabloids, but from something darker, something he believed pursued him through silence. During the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, as satanic panic spread across America, fans and critics twisted his perfection into mythology. Some claimed Michael wasn't fighting the industry at all. They said he was fighting Satan himself. Janet was believed to be the only one who truly saw what that fear did to him behind closed doors. The sleepless nights, the lights that stayed on, the way he flinched at shadows no one else noticed. After decades of restraint, she finally spoke about the secret he carried, one tied to the most disturbing rumors ever attached to a black icon. This is not a story about fame. It is about a darkness he never escaped. Chapter 1. 1965 to 1982. The Family Shadow. They say every legend begins with light. But Michael Jackson's story began with noise, collapsing walls, creaking floorboards, and the echo of a father's footsteps in a house too small for 7 children and 1 rising star. To understand the secret Janet would one day reveal, the one that haunted Michael until the end, you have to return to Gary, Indiana. It was 1965. The Jackson family lived in a cramped 2-bedroom house on Jackson Street. Winters froze ice onto the inside of the windows. Summers turned the air thick and suffocating. Poverty clung to every brick. Factories coughed smoke day and night, and the ground itself felt exhausted beneath black families struggling to survive in a city designed to forget them. Inside that house, a boy named Michael lived under pressure the world would never fully understand. Joe Jackson ran the home with the discipline of a drill sergeant. This wasn't rumor, it wasn't myth. It was the foundation of the Jackson childhood. Mornings began with chores. Afternoons ended in rehearsals. Mistakes were corrected with an intensity that sank deep into Michael's body and stayed there. Janet later said simply, "We were raised in fear." She never softened that sentence, not decades later, not with hindsight. And when she said fear, she didn't mean something abstract. She meant the kind that shapes your spine, follows you into adulthood, and teaches you to perform even when every instinct tells you to run. Between 1968 and 1975, the Jackson 5 exploded. 5 boys from Gary dominated charts, television, and living rooms across America. But behind the glitter, the reality was sharper. For Michael, fame didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a cage built from applause. While other children scraped knees and rode bikes, he memorized choreography under harsh lights. When others stayed home sick, he was pushed on stage. Birthdays became rehearsals. Childhood disappeared. Michael later called those years the loss of my childhood. Janet said it more plainly. He never had one. And in that house, something else grew, not physical, not supernatural, but psychological. The kind of darkness that forms when a child is trained to be perfect before he learns how to be human. Neighbors noticed. Communities whispered. Not about demons, but about heaviness, a sadness behind his eyes when he was tired. Not evil, just a child carrying too much. By 1972, as his solo career intensified, the pressure deepened. Television, tours, studio sessions piled on endlessly. Cracks formed behind the smile. Janet watched it all. She watched him rehearse until sweat soaked through his clothes. She watched him command crowds while still flinching at their father's voice. Even then, she sensed something breaking, something planted in that house long before fame. That seed would later be twisted into rumors about darkness and Satan. But it was planted here in fear mistaken for discipline, in pressure mistaken for love, in a boy who was never allowed to be a child. Chapter 2, 1982 to 1989. Thriller and the Rumors of Darkness. There are moments in music history that don't feel like releases. They feel like eruptions. The 30th of November, 1982 was one of those dates the night Thriller arrived, and America could almost feel the air shift. Radios buzzed. Living rooms glowed. Teenagers pressed close to TV screens, waiting to see what this quiet, razor-sharp, otherworldly young man would do next. Michael Jackson didn't just drop an album. He fractured culture, cracked it open, and through that crack came superstardom and something darker. Because in the early 1980 seconds, America was already drowning in what historians later called the Satanic Panic era, a time when anything strange, stylish, or powerful could be painted as dangerous. Heavy metal bands, Dungeons and Dragons, horror movies, even daycare workers. Everyone was a suspect in a moral hysteria that spread across black and white communities alike. And into that storm walked Michael Jackson, glowing eyes, werewolf teeth, zombies rising from pavement, choreography so sharp it didn't look like it belonged to the living. When the Thriller short film premiered in December 1983, it didn't just make fans scream, it made newspapers tense up. According to reports from that era, some black churches in the South called the video spiritually troubling. Conservative groups mailed warnings to MTV. Pastors urged parents to keep children away from what they described as a devil video. And yet, the more people feared it, the more they watched. Michael became the center of a cultural earthquake without ever asking to be. In early 1984, people could turn on the news and hear anchors debating whether his transformations were harmless theatrics or coded satanic symbolism. In barbershops, uncles muttered that the boy had gone too far. In Harlem, teenagers copied every move, while elders shook their heads, warning that fame had a way of calling shadows. Janet Jackson later said something that sounded simple, but landed like a bruise. Michael was fighting the shadows of fame. She meant pressure, exhaustion, isolation, a metaphor. But America didn't treat it like a metaphor. Not in the 1980 seconds. Not during Panic. They twisted her words into something supernatural, as if she'd admitted her brother was battling an actual presence. And the rumors spread the way wildfire spreads, fast, hungry, and almost impossible to stop. Between 1983 and 1985, gossip magazines, church forums, late-night talk radio, and neighborhood conversations circled the same idea. Michael Jackson was too perfect, too untouchable, too transformed to be normal. It wasn't always framed as a direct accusation. Often, it sounded like cultural folklore, the way people once whispered legends about blues musicians before cameras existed. Myths born from awe and fear and misunderstanding. Still, the whispers grew louder with every milestone. When Thriller became the best-selling album of all time, some people didn't call it skill. They called it a deal. When he moonwalked on Motown 25 inches 1983 and froze the world in place, people swore no human moved like that. When his face changed, when his voice softened, when the single glove became iconic, every evolution fed the story. And behind the scenes, Michael was living a reality far different from the mythology being written around him. The Bad Tour, 1987 to 1989, became a turning point, a global spectacle that demanded everything. Night after night, thousands screamed his name, reaching for him, worshiping him like he was more than human. But backstage, dancers and crew members described a man shrinking under the weight of his own brilliance. Some claimed he refused to sleep in rooms that were fully dark. They said he asked for lights to stay on, even small ones, a lamp in the bathroom, a hallway check before the door closed. Others whispered that he avoided shadowy corners in hotels, or that he didn't like mirrors at night. None of it can be proven as fact. But tiny behaviors born from exhaustion or anxiety become something else when you're famous enough. The smallest habit gets magnified into evidence. Evidence becomes legend. Legend becomes fear. By the late 1980 seconds, Satanic Panic had reached a fever pitch. People were hunting for villains in album sleeves, dance moves, video edits. Michael, with supernatural charisma and impossible success, became an easy target. And yet, the real truth wasn't supernatural at all. It was more tragic. Michael wasn't being chased by demons. He was being chased by expectation, by pressure, by the machinery of fame that never let him stop performing long enough to breathe. But to outsiders, the myth felt cleaner. It's easier to believe a superstar made a deal with darkness than to accept that we, the audience, were the ones draining the light out of him. Meanwhile, Janet watched quietly. She saw the way his smile tightened. She saw how he grew more private, more guarded. She watched crowds turn him into a myth, and myths turn him into something people feared. And somewhere in those years, beneath opening nights, awards, tabloid headlines, and hotel rooms with lights left on, she began to understand what her brother could never outrun. Not Satan, not demons. The darkness of fame itself. A darkness that only grew stronger until it started to swallow him whole. This was the era that made him immortal, and the era that began destroying him. And Janet knew that if the world ever learned what those years truly did to Michael, they would never look at his success the same way again. Chapter 3, 1993, The Breaking Point. Janet never forgot the summer of 1993. By then, Michael Jackson was no longer just a superstar. He was a global monument, admired, imitated, dissected. And that was the year everything fractured, not gradually, but violently, like glass collapsing under its own weight. It began on the 24th of August 1993. The allegations surfaced without warning, slicing through pop culture like a blade. Fans froze. Headlines detonated. Networks scrambled. But it was Michael who absorbed the full shock. According to people close to him, the first change wasn't panic. It was stillness. Michael, the restless perfectionist who once paced rooms like a storm, began moving slowly, as if gravity had suddenly increased. Tours continued. Rehearsals stayed on schedule. Public appearances held their shape. But privately, the damage was immediate. Janet said she heard it in his voice, a thinning, a hesitation, a fear that hadn't been there before. She later summed it up in 4 words that carried more weight than any headline. He felt hunted. As the fall unfolded, exhaustion turned into collapse. Michael slept less, sometimes not at all. He wandered hotel suites with curtains drawn tight. He paced rehearsals until his legs shook. Doctors prescribed sedatives legally, medically, to help him rest. Instead, rest slipped further away. Dependency crept in quietly, night by night, pill by pill, just enough to survive the next day. And when the lights came up, he performed like nothing was wrong. That was the tragedy. He could hide agony inside brilliance. Behind the scenes, whispers spread. Crew members said he kept televisions on at night, not for entertainment, but for sound voices filling the silence, proof he wasn't alone. Others claimed he avoided sleeping in total darkness. None of it was ever confirmed. No one went on record, but folklore doesn't spread because it's proven. It spreads because it feels true. What is confirmed is this. His insomnia became severe. His anxiety deepened. His sense of safety vanished. Janet watched as the brother who once believed the world loved him began to move as though the world were closing in. And then came the rumor that refused to die. According to long-circulating lore, one night in late 1993, somewhere between legal meetings and tour stops, Michael was alone in a Las Vegas hotel suite. It was after midnight. The city outside glowed neon and restless. Inside, the room was silent. The story goes that he picked up the phone and called Janet, not to discuss lawyers or accusations, but to say something far more fragile. Fame is killing me on the inside. No one can prove that call happened. It exists only in whispers passed through fan circles and backstage memories, but it survived because it sounded like something Michael could have said, and that, for Janet, was the most haunting part. From late 1993 into 1994, his health unraveled. Tour dates were canceled. He entered treatment. He withdrew from cameras and interviews. The man who once walked onto the Motown 25 stage like a force of nature now struggled to move through hotel corridors without help. This wasn't the fall of a pop star, it was the collapse of someone who had carried too much for too long. And Janet stayed quiet. When journalists pressed her, she deflected. She softened her words. She knew that whatever Michael was experiencing wasn't something the world deserved to consume. It was private. It was fragile. It was his. This chapter didn't end with answers. It ended with absence. A silence heavy enough to swallow sound. And inside that silence sat the question no one wanted to ask out loud. When the myth cracks, who is left to hold the person inside it? Chapter 4, 2001 to 2009. The Final Fears. By the early 2000s, something in Michael Jackson had shifted. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, but those closest to him sensed it long before the public ever did. When Invincible was released in 2001, the album arrived with the polish and ambition fans expected. Michael himself, however, appeared quieter, more withdrawn, like a man moving carefully through a world he no longer trusted. Friends said the walls around him grew higher. Interviews became rare. Rehearsals became private. He slipped in and out of public spaces as if trying not to leave footprints. There was a calm about him, but it wasn't peace. It felt like someone bracing for impact. Then came 2003. The documentary aired. Old accusations resurfaced. The machinery of scrutiny started turning again. For most celebrities, scandal is a storm that eventually passes. For Michael, already fragile, it was an earthquake. During the court years that followed, security teams described him as delicate, not physically weak, but mentally worn down in a way they hadn't seen before. Sleep abandoned him almost entirely. His appetite faded. His world shrank to hotel rooms, court corridors, and short, suffocating car rides between the two. Crew members from that era, speaking only years later and never on record, shared the same whispers. They said Michael disliked mirrors after dark. That reflective surfaces seemed to unsettle him. Some claimed towels were quietly placed over glass once night fell, not because he demanded it, but because those around him learned to recognize the tension in his body. Others remembered how he preferred at least one lamp left on through the night, even in luxury suites. It wasn't superstition, they said. It was comfort. Light meant presence. Silence meant something else. A hotel worker in Japan once recalled Michael asking for hallway lights to remain on until his door closed. Another insider remembered a moment backstage when a door slammed unexpectedly. Michael jerked back instinctively, hand raised as if shielding himself from something unseen. To them, it wasn't fear of violence. It was fear of surprise. Fear of the unknown. The reflex of someone who had spent a lifetime on edge. Slowly, these details became folklore. Michael keeps the lights on. Michael flinches at sudden sounds. Michael avoids mirrors late at night. But beneath the whispers sat a simpler truth. He was exhausted deeply, dangerously exhausted. By 2008, Michael believed one thing could fix everything. A return to the stage. This is it. The comeback that would restore control, dignity, legacy. But his body told a different story. The insomnia that had haunted him since the 1,990 seconds had become unmanageable. Nights stretched into mornings without rest. He paced. He drifted in and out of fractured sleep. Doctors later described the severity of his condition. This wasn't light insomnia. In some stretches, he wasn't sleeping at all. And in desperation, under medical supervision, he began using a drug meant for surgery, not sleep, the only thing that could silence his mind. Throughout rehearsals in 2009, the pattern repeated. Electric focus under stage lights, trembling exhaustion afterward, hope one moment, fragility the next. Those around him said he looked like a man balancing on the edge of something invisible. When Janet saw him during those final months, she recognized the look immediately. The same hollow expression she had seen in 1993. The same hunted stillness. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. She simply said he had been in pain long before he died. These were Michael Jackson's final fears. Not demons, not Satan, but a lifetime of pressure that never loosened its grip. Fear that followed him from childhood to hotel rooms to rehearsal halls, whispering that nothing would ever be enough. Chapter 5. What Janet Finally Revealed. In every family, there is usually one person who sees the truth before anyone else. In the Jackson family, quietly and painfully, that person was Janet. For decades, the world built its own explanations for Michael Jackson's unraveling. Journalists framed it as scandal. Fans framed it as tragedy. And the public, hungry for something supernatural, wrapped his pain in stories of demons and Satan, convinced that genius, that powerful, had to be touched by darkness. But when Janet finally spoke, she didn't feed the mythology, she dismantled it. According to her, the thing that destroyed Michael was never supernatural. It wasn't a ritual, it wasn't a curse. It was something far more ordinary and far more merciless. It was the industry that crowned him. The pressure that shaped him. The fear that never let him breathe. She described a brother who lived inside a maze of expectations, a man whose childhood trauma blended into adult responsibility until the two became impossible to separate. Michael wasn't afraid of monsters or demons. He was afraid of failing a world that had demanded perfection from him since he was 6 years old. Janet said his fear didn't have a name. It lived between breaths, in hotel hallways, in rehearsal rooms, in the quiet moments after applause faded. Fame had taught him one lesson over and over again. The same world that lifts you up can turn on you without warning. When she said he felt hunted, she wasn't describing paranoia in a supernatural sense. She was describing what it feels like to be preyed on by expectations, by executives, by contracts, by deadlines, by an audience that never stops wanting more. Michael felt surrounded not by demons, but by demands. Janet spoke about perfection as both his armor and his prison. He rehearsed until his hands shook. He scrutinized every frame of footage. He carried the weight of his image like a sentence he could never finish serving. To the world, he was magic. To himself, he was a man terrified of slipping, terrified of being ordinary, terrified of disappointing millions. That, Janet explained, was the truth worse than death. Not a hidden ritual, not a satanic secret, but a lifetime of pressure that began in childhood and never loosened its grip, a system that consumed his humanity while celebrating his brilliance. She said the world's obsession with Satan rumors revealed more about society than about Michael. People needed an explanation for genius they couldn't comprehend. It was easier to invent darkness than to accept responsibility. Easier to blame a demon than to admit what fame does to fragile people. Janet didn't raise her voice when she revealed this. She didn't dramatize it. She spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had watched a loved one suffer in ways the world refused to see. Michael's fear, she said, never left him, not in childhood, not in the thriller years, not in the courtroom era, not in the final rehearsals. In the end, Janet didn't expose a supernatural secret. She exposed the cost, the emotional, psychological, and spiritual price of becoming